Hello again, this is Gary Millsap with the Adult Sunday School lesson for September the 26th. Welcome back. Our lesson today is entitled Courage, at least that's what the lesson writer has called it. It's from the book of Esther. You may be wondering what that Greek word means down at the bottom in red letters. That's the word praxis, and that is the title, or that's the name of the Sunday school class that I teach. So in addition to doing this video, for anybody that would like to look at it, I also share this with my Praxis Sunday School class. So we are dealing with a unit called Living Wisely. We've looked in the book of Proverbs so far in this unit. We've dealt with fairness, knowledge, character. Courage is the title for today's lesson. And it seeks to help us live more faithfully as God's people. The unit in fairness helped us examine what it means to treat others justly, just treatment of others. We've looked at the female personification of wisdom and a person called Sophia. When we looked at knowledge, we've looked at the ideal woman or wife or ideal person of character last week, and today we're looking at courage in the person of the Queen Esther. So courage may be defined as a quality shown by someone who decides to do something difficult or dangerous, even though they may be afraid. So it's the idea of overcoming fear and stepping up to the plate to do something, and certainly that's the situation with Esther, but we may be called upon to exhibit courage in our Christian lives as well. The word courage actually stems from the English word heart, and or there's a French word coeur, which means heart. So people that have a lot of heart are courageous and unafraid to step into the breach. Maya Angelou, who is a poet laureate of our country, or past poet laureate, says, "Courage is the most important of all virtues because without courage you can't practice any other virtue consistently." My good buddy John Wayne says, "Courage is being scared to death but saddling up anyway." Good for you, Duke. And we all go through life, and sometimes it takes courage just to get out of bed. I know people who are struggling with interpersonal demons and psychic demons, and it's really a challenge just to function during the day. And we've all met people who are brave in battle or who stepped up to look at really hard tasks in life, but have been able to accomplish what they needed to. And so that's what we want to look at today, courage. I invite you to look at the BibleProject.com. There's also a sheet and a video that deals with the book of Esther. This is the only lesson that we have in Esther, so we're not going to be dealing with all aspects of Esther, but we'll look at some key verses. I want to introduce this word called pogrom because it's intimately associated with the history of the Jews. It seemed like they just can't catch a break. Everywhere they go, people want to get rid of them. It started with, the children as they were captive in Egypt. And today's lesson from Esther has the children of Israel, the object of a pogrom against the Persians. They want to get rid of the Jews. It seemed that wherever the Jews ended up, whether they were imprisoned or deported, they made the best of it. They prospered in their situation. And by the time that they were conquered in the Holy Land and deported over to what is now Iraq, Babylonian exile and Persian exile, they had amassed wealth. They were doing well, and they raised the wrath of the local citizenry who said, "They're making out, they're prospering. We need to grab their money and their lands and reclaim them for ourselves." So that is the backstory of this book of Esther, that The Jews were marked for a pogrom by some of the wicked people in Persia. And due to Esther's courage, that pogrom did not occur. So Esther was a queen. She was an Israelite queen of one of the many queens of the Persian king Xerxes. He had so many wives, he didn't understand intimate details of all of his wives. He didn't understand for a long time that Esther was one of the Israelites. And this is revealed to Xerxes by Esther in an appeal not to go forward with this persecution and killing and taking of the property of the Israelites there in Persia. So a bit of a backgrounder about the book of Esther. She was a Jewish queen of Persia who saves her people from genocide. It wasn't just a pogrom. It wasn't just a minor persecution, but they wanted to wipe out the Jews. They wanted to wipe them out much the way the Nazis wanted to wipe out the Jews in the 20th century. It's one of the best written short stories of all literature, not just the Bible. The author is unknown. It may have been Ezra or Nehemiah, some of the Jewish patriarchs. But it's set during the reign of King Xerxes. That's how he's known in the Western world. The Israelites call him by another name. It's mentioned in the scripture as this Ahasuerus. Ahasuerus. Ahasuerus, I guess, is how you pronounce it. But anyway, these events take place about 30 years before Ezra and Nehemiah led the repatriation of the Holy Land after the Babylonian captivity. As I said, the Persian Empire is now Iran. The capital, Susa, is now called Shusha. Esther is the adopted daughter of her uncle Mordecai, who's mentioned in the book. She becomes queen to King Xerxes, who has a chief minister named Haman, who hates the Jews and plans their genocide. Haman, we want to remember that name. It's a name of, it's an evil name. So really the book of Esther describes the origin of the Feast of Purim, which is part of the practice, standard Jewish practice today that occurs on the dates 13 to 15 Adar in their month, which is kind of like February, April of our month. So it's a spring festival. It's a celebration. That they still celebrate Passover and other high holy days. And so the Feast of Purim is also one of their high holy days. And so the book demonstrates the power of God to control events and care for his people even when everything seems to be against them. The book of Esther is odd in one sense in that it never mentions God, even once. But God is ever present in the background orchestrating affairs. It displays a detailed knowledge of Persian court and customs. So it was probably written during this time of subjugation. It's only one of two books in the Bible named after a woman. The other book is, of course, Ruth. The book of Esther is not represented in the Dead Sea Scrolls, and scholars have wondered why that's the case, but Purim is a late addition to Jewish history. It's not mentioned by Moses at all, so there would not be a long tradition associated with the festival or celebration of Purim. Maybe that's one reason why it's not in the Dead Sea Scrolls. But you may be wondering, if Esther shows God's work protecting the Jews, why would the writer downplay the religious angle, not even mentioning God or Yahweh? Well, they say it may have been to entice secular readers to consider God's work in the world. Sometimes if you're labeled a religious work or a religious movie or periodical, people will shun that. But if you pick up the story of Esther, it's hard not to be captivated by it. You can't hardly put it down. It's an excellent short story. So Purim is a fun-filled spring holiday in the spirit of how we do Mardi Gras. As they celebrate the holiday and read the story in Esther, they dress up, they have skits, they give gifts to one another, and whenever Haman's name is mentioned, others that are standing by try to drown it out. He's such a bad guy. They make noise makers that rattle. They try to drown him out because he's a bad dude in all respects. So they have a little fun with it as well. So as you read the text, you may want to do the same thing whenever we come up to Haman's name. Some people, some scholars, I mean, these are serious people now, not just backwater amateurs like myself. They read Esther as a comedy in some regard. They say big laughs, if you read the Jewish text, would come at some places, including in our text today, there's a place of great humor, they say. For example, Mordecai rides on a king's horse, and while the wicked Haman acts on the king's order, leads it and shouts praises to his enemy Mordecai. It's supposed to be a very hilarious depiction of Haman praising his enemy Mordecai. In another example in our text today, Haman falls on the queen as though he's assaulting her or grabbing her or trying to get fresh with her as the king walks in. This would have a comedic effect and would cause everybody to take notice. You know, you wouldn't dare even approach royalty, much less grab them or attempt to assault or kiss them. And when the king, in the end, orders Haman impaled, the king says that he's not so angry anymore. This is kind of a slapstick humor that people may be laughing at. So, you know, it has elements of a great drama and narrative and short story that really is engaging and wants to make us look at it in a lot of ways. So evidently, in Persian law, once the king made a decree, it could not be set aside. So the king had unknowingly made a decree that the children of Israel were to be killed, and once that was set aside, he had to issue a counter decree declaring his support for the Jews. But many Persians went ahead with their plan for the land grab and wealth grab from the Jews. So the book describes fighting with Haman and his sons being killed along with 75,000 other Persians. But the Jews are saved. So what are my keys? Well, is it a story or history? Is it factual to the T, or is it meant to provide a basis for something that happened long ago for which there is no history? The text of the book of Esther occurs in the Hebrew version in the Old Testament, which is the Old Testament text in Hebrew, which is rather straightforward. It's embellished somewhat in its Greek version, which you can read in the Apocrypha. And if you have a Bible that has an Apocrypha, if you read Hebrews in the Apocrypha version, you'll see that it's a bit longer and more detailed than what it appears in the Hebrew Scriptures. As I mentioned, it's not in the Dead Sea Scrolls at all. But, you know, it's just what I get from it, from a arm's length study. Just as Exodus chapters 1 to 15 represents a rationale for the Passover, Esther does so for the Feast of Purim. You know, it's kind of like we Christians have taken over the celebration of Halloween. We didn't arrive at it. It had pagan sources. So the ancient Jews took over the Persian celebration of Purim. And so this is their spin on the story that gives it meaning for their style of worship. It's, as I said, it's in the spirit of Mardi Gras with festivals eating, gift-giving, celebration, skits, and noise-making, which I will not do anymore. I think I've demonstrated enough of how it might go if we were celebrating Purim otherwise. This is an example of the drama triangle. I want to show you why Esther is such a powerful short story. There's a victim. In any drama, there's a victim, there's a persecutor, and there's a rescuer or savior. And, you know, in our interpersonal world, sometimes we're victims, sometimes we're persecutors, sometimes we're rescuer. But in this story, Esther can be seen as the victim. The persecutor is the wicked Haman, who is a king's servant. And the rescuer, in this case, could be Mordecai, or you could see Esther as also the rescuer. In a larger context, the Jews are the victim, or maybe all the faithful who have been unjustly hurt, or all people who have suffered, who are victimized. Persecutors could be not only the Persians, but also forces of evil and Satan. And of course, the biggest rescuer in the drama triangle is God, or Yahweh. So let's read some courageous action here in Esther chapter 7, verses 1 through 4. So the king and Haman went in to feast with Queen Esther. On the second day, as they were drinking wine, the king again said to Esther, "What is your petition, Queen Esther? It shall be granted you. And what is your request? Even to half my kingdom, it shall be fulfilled." Then Queen Esther answered, "If I have won your favor, O king, and if it pleases the king, let my life be given me. That is my petition. And the lives of my people. That is my request. For we have been sold, I and my people, to be destroyed, to be killed, and to be annihilated. If we had been sold merely as slaves, men and women, I would have held my peace. But no enemy can compensate for this damage to you, the king." So, the king and Haman are having a feast along with Esther. And the king will grant during this feast whatever Esther asks. So she asks only that her life and the lives of her people be spared. Esther explains that she and her people have been sold to be destroyed, killed, and annihilated, which is bad for us, of course, but it's an assault to you. It's a theft from you of your subjects and of the wealth that should be yours. One of the backstory elements of this is that Mordecai had refused to bow down to Haman, kind of like Daniel, who wouldn't bow down to the golden idols in the book of Daniel. So Haman had persuaded the king to issue a decree to eliminate all the Jewish people because they were haughty, they were not subservient, they were wicked and evil. Haman also had secretly constructed a giant gallows or guillotine. We don't know exactly what it was. It may have been some type of a spear. Our text says it's kind of a gallows on which he was going to hang Mordecai himself. He was going to take great pleasure in destroying him. But it seems strange in our Western mindset, but King Xerxes does not know that Esther is Jewish. Mordecai implores Esther to make this request. Seems like a straightforward thing for us to do, but we forget in a royal setting like this, it was forbidden to speak out of turn. You couldn't approach a king or queen or royalty unless you were bidden to do so. If you approached them, you would be struck down. Guards would kill you on the spot. When I was in the military, we have this tradition in the military: request permission to speak, sir. You only spoke when you were spoken to, and if you wanted to say something, you had to request permission. Request permission to speak, sir? It would either be granted or not. So Esther here is violating this solemn practice among loyalty and is speaking up for her life and the life of her people. That's where the courage comes from. Quite an interesting depiction. So now we're going to have a reversal of fortune in these verses in chapter 7. Then King Xerxes said to Queen Esther, "Who is he, and where is he who has presumed to do this?" Esther said, "A foe, an enemy, this wicked Haman." Then Haman was terrified before the king and the queen, with good reason. Then Harbona, one of the eunuchs in attendance on the king, said, "Look, the very gallows that Haman has prepared for Mordecai, whose word saved the king, stands at Haman's house, 50 cubits high." And the king said, "Hang him on that." So they hanged Haman on the gallows that he had prepared for Mordecai. And this is the funny part. And the king was not as angry anymore. So the king asked, "Who is the villain in this tragedy?" And Esther identifies it as Haman. And then he becomes terrified. The king tells his servants to hang Haman on the very gallows that Haman had prepared to kill Mordecai. Then the king was not so angry. Hee. And we're going to celebrate deliverance in chapter 9, verses 20 to 22. Mordecai recorded these things and sent letters to all the Jews who were in all the provinces of King Xerxes, both near and far, enjoining them that they should keep the 14th day of the month Adar, and also the 15th day of the same month, year by year, as the days on which the Jews gained relief from their enemies, and as the month that had been turned for them from sorrow into gladness, and from mourning into holiday, that they should make them days of feasting and gladness, days for sending gifts of food to one another and presents to the poor. Wow, it is a celebration. Mordecai recorded these things and sent them out near and far to keep remembrance of this feast, what became known as the Feast of Purim, on a given day and month every year. And it's seen as a joyous time when the Jews were saved, were relieved from their enemies. Their sorrow turned to gladness, their mourning to holiday with feasting, gladness, gifts of food and presents to the poor. In other words, a party time. Here are some questions that you might think about as in your classes. What events or decisions or individuals have led you to become more courageous? Have you ever felt you have demonstrated courage in the face of persecution or a problem? What risks have you taken that changed your life and the life of others? I've benefited a great deal from many people in my life who went out of their way to help me and who took risks. What started out as self-defense, if you read the scriptures, and if these are literally so, I'm sure there's maybe some exaggeration, at least in this, it devolves into a slaughter of 75,000 Gentiles. So how can we condemn the violence while affirming the courage of Esther? You know, some people write, there's passive reacting to oppression. There's assertive reaction to oppression. Sometimes there needs to be aggressive reaction to oppression or hurt. If we're about to be struck down and killed unjustly, sometimes just a passive reaction is not enough. So I'm not one who says every reaction must be passive, but I think there are limits, and we should seek to bring the least violence into the world that could secure us. Others may have different ideas, so that's why your Sunday school discussion might go a bit deeper into these questions. So again, thank you for joining me today. Don't take me too serious. I'm a layperson only. Check my sources. Remember our prayer concerns that we list in our Sunday school classes, and we'll see you next week. thanks again. A big shout out to Daryl for all of his help. Check out these sources, read the scripture, and look up the BibleProject.com. Thank you very much.